Coastal fog rolled in over the seaside town of Ash Harbor, Maine, like a living thing, soft gray tendrils weaving through the early morning streets, wrapping around lampposts and clinging to the red-bricked buildings with a ghostly grip. It was 6 a.m., and already the wharf was alive with movement. Fishermen in yellow slickers moved like shadows through the mist, their boots echoing against the damp wooden planks. The smell of salt and diesel filled the air, mixing with the faint aroma of fresh bread from a nearby café. Ash Harbor was a small town, no more than 8,000 residents, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in familiarity. Everyone knew everyone. The grocer could list every family in town by name. Children played on the same soccer fields their parents once did. Gossip traveled faster than weather. So when Madeline Rhodes, a bright 22-year-old waitress, vanished 3 years ago from the Mariner's Cross, it didn't just shake the community, it shattered it. The Mariner's Cross stood like a relic at the edge of the harbor. Once a bait-and-tackle shop, it had been lovingly converted by Madeline's uncle, Lucas Merritt, a stern but respected chef now 47, into the town's most upscale dining destination. Its weathered cedar shingles and exposed beams gave it character. The interior gleamed with polished floors, navy blue linens, and an open kitchen framed by hanging copper pans. It was the kind of place you booked for anniversaries or asked for proposals. On the night she disappeared, Madeline had worked the late shift. She'd just finished wiping down tables and was seen walking out the front door at 2:18 a.m. Security footage captured her auburn ponytail bouncing as she left, her figure briefly illuminated by the flickering porch light before vanishing into the night mist. That was the last time anyone saw her. No car, no scream, no sign of struggle, just gone. The police scoured the town. Helicopters searched the nearby woods. Boats dragged the coastline. For months, the townsfolk placed candles in their windows. But eventually, the posters faded. The news coverage stopped, and the town moved on, except for Eleanor Rhodes, Madeline's 43-year-old mother. She never stopped. Never. Now, 3 years later, Eleanor sat in the same restaurant her daughter had worked in, the same place she had avoided since the tragedy. It was too painful, too saturated with memories. But something had changed. A letter had arrived 3 days ago. No return address. Just a postmark from Honolulu. It read, "Saw a girl named May at a café on Wiki. Same red hair. Same smile. She looked like the girl in those missing posters. I thought you should know." It wasn't the first lead. Eleanor had received dozens over the years. Most were hoaxes or wishful thinking from strangers who didn't know her pain. But this one felt different. It had details. A name. A location. Lucas, her brother-in-law and owner of the Mariner's Cross, sat across from her in the restaurant's front corner booth. The sunlight was just beginning to slip through the wooden blinds, casting gold streaks across the table where newspaper clippings, old police photos, and grainy CCTV stills were fanned out in front of them. Eleanor ran a hand through her chestnut hair, now streaked with silver. "The letter said last Tuesday," she whispered, tapping the page. "That's only 5 days ago." Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "We've had false alarms before, dozens. But not with a name. Not with this much description." She slid a photo across the table. A grainy image taken on a phone camera. A young woman with red hair walking out of a cafe, head slightly turned. Blurry. But something about the way she stood made Eleanor's breath catch. Lucas studied the photo. "Could be anyone," he said gently. "But, yeah, I see it." "I'm going to Hawaii," Eleanor said firmly. "Then I'm going with you," Lucas replied without hesitation. "No way I'm letting you go alone." Eleanor gave him a tired smile. "Let's talk about it more today. I needed to be here first." Lucas nodded, his eyes briefly glancing to the framed picture of Madeline that still hung near the host's stand. "You want breakfast?" he asked. "We've got a new soup today I think you'll like. Albondigas, but with a green broth. Lighter, citrusy. Meatballs have been simmering all night." "I haven't eaten here since she disappeared," Eleanor admitted, glancing toward the kitchen door, where waitstaff in blue-striped aprons bustled past. "Not once." "I know. But maybe it's time." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right. I'll be your taste tester." Lucas smiled, stood, and disappeared into the kitchen. Eleanor leaned back in her seat, staring at the laptop open before her. Images of Madeline flashed on screen: graduation, her first day at the restaurant, laughing with a cake on her 19th birthday. Eleanor's chest tightened. Outside, the harbor horn sounded. Lucas returned, wiping his hands on a towel. "Food delivery just arrived," he said. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere." As Lucas stepped out the front door, his head chef Marco came from the kitchen, frustration written across his face. "Oven's busted again. Do you still have that backup one?" Eleanor glanced up. "The old one? From my garage? Lucas borrowed it years ago when his broke." Marco nodded. "Where would it be?" "Probably in the basement," she said slowly. "Storage room. That's where Lucas used to keep old equipment." Marco disappeared downstairs, and a few moments later returned with a frown. "Can't find it." "I'll help," Eleanor offered. Together, they descended into the cool, dimly lit basement. The air smelled of bleach and old earth. Rows of supplies lined the walls. "It used to be here," Eleanor said, gesturing toward an empty corner. "Maybe he moved it," Marco said. "Let's try the storage room," she suggested. They crossed the floor to a heavy metal door. Eleanor reached for the handle, locked. "That one's always locked," Marco explained. "Only Lucas has the key." Heavy steps echoed from the stairs as Lucas returned. "What are you two doing?" "Looking for the backup oven," Marco explained. "Storage room is locked." Lucas paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think I might have moved it to my place." "And the key?" "Not with me." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "You don't remember where you put a whole oven?" "I've been meaning to clean down here," Lucas said quickly. "That room's a mess. Dusty. Not worth digging through." Eleanor didn't respond, but something about Lucas's nervousness, the missing oven, and that locked door, it gnawed at her. Back upstairs in the restaurant's main dining area, the morning sun had risen higher, its light now pouring in stronger through the window slats, cutting across the hardwood floor in golden stripes. The sounds of the kitchen returned, rhythmic chopping, the hiss of something sautéing, the chatter of staff preparing for the day service. Eleanor sat once again at her corner booth, fingers tapping anxiously against her coffee mug, her mind still tangled with the thought of that locked storage room and Lucas's evasive response. Marco had returned to the kitchen, and Lucas offered to fetch the forgotten key from his nearby home, brushing off Eleanor's quiet offer to go get it herself. No, he had insisted with a quick, almost too forceful smile. "You sit. Relax. You deserve breakfast, and the soup should be ready any minute." Then he'd slipped out the front door, claiming he'd only be gone a few minutes. Alone now, Eleanor reopened her laptop, her screen once again filled with images of her daughter. Madeline's face stared back at her from the familiar missing posters and candid snapshots she'd spent countless hours looking through. A young woman so full of life, her green eyes gleaming with possibility, her vibrant hair cascading down in a riot of curls. Eleanor blinked hard, swallowing the lump in her throat as her hand brushed over one image in particular. Madeline on her 19th birthday, the two of them laughing over a candlelit cake, unaware it would be one of the last photos ever taken of her. The door jingled, snapping Eleanor from her thoughts. A young waitress approached with a bright smile and a tray balanced in her hands. She was wearing the same blue-striped apron Madeline used to wear during her shifts, faded from washes, but unmistakably familiar. For one heart-wrenching moment, Eleanor's breath caught in her chest. The girl's hair was dark, but her stance, the tilt of her head, something about her sparked a pang of déjà vu. "Good morning, ma'am," the waitress said politely, setting down a steaming bowl and accompanying plate. "Your breakfast is ready. Chef Marco asked me to tell you today's soup is our house green albondigas, slow-simmered all night in garlic and herbs. There's also broiled halibut, caught fresh from the harbor this morning, and egg toast with herb butter." She placed everything with practiced efficiency and stepped away with a nod. Eleanor offered a tight smile in return, her stomach tight with nerves. She picked up her fork and sampled the toast first, warm and buttery, with just the right crisp. Then the fish, which flaked apart delicately under her fork. But it was the soup that drew her attention most, the bowl of vibrant green broth flecked with herbs, steam curling up from its surface. She raised the spoon to her lips and took a sip. It was rich, savory, with undertones of cilantro and garlic. The broth had clearly been tended for hours. A second spoonful followed, this time deeper, scooping from near the bottom where the meatballs rested. As she lifted the spoon again, something in the soup caught the light, a glint of color foreign to the broth. Eleanor's hand froze. Floating just beside the meatball was a thick clump of red-orange hair. Her breath hitched. Auburn, the exact shade that Madeline had inherited from her. Heart pounding, Eleanor set the spoon down gently and leaned forward, peering into the bowl. She stirred the broth slowly. More strands surfaced, swirling in the green liquid like threads of a memory trying to resurface. It wasn't a stray hair. It wasn't a kitchen accident. This was a deliberate cluster, too many, too specific. Her eyes darted around the restaurant. None of the staff had hair that color. Not Marco, not the waitress, not even Lucas. Her own hair, now mostly brown-gray, bore no resemblance to the strands before her. Her mind began to spin. No, it couldn't be. Unless it could. Could someone be playing a sick joke? A cruel prank? But who would know that color? Who else would understand what it meant? Her eyes flicked to her laptop, still open, still showing that same photo of Madeline laughing in the kitchen. Her daughter's curls caught the light just like the strands in the soup now did. Eleanor's hand moved with quiet urgency. She grabbed a napkin, folded it thick, and with the edge of her spoon carefully lifted the hair from the bowl. She wrapped it inside the paper, pressing the bundle into her coat pocket as her heart thundered in her chest. The warmth of the soup still clung to the napkin. Her fingers trembled. Just then, the front door opened with a cheerful jingle. Lucas walked in, wiping his hands on a towel, an easy smile on his face. "Sorry about that," he said. The delivery guy had more to say than usual. "You try the soup yet?" He made his way to the table and glanced down at her bowl. "How's everything taste?" Eleanor straightened, fighting to keep her expression neutral. She cleared her throat. "The toast and fish are great," she said carefully. "But the soup's a bit too salty for my taste." Lucas nodded and reached for her spoon. "Mind if I try it?" I tweaked the recipe this time. Before she could object, he scooped a bit of broth and brought it to his mouth. As he did, Eleanor watched as two red strands clung to the spoon's edge, curling wetly around the bowl's rim. Lucas froze slightly when he saw them. His fingers plucked them free, his eyes scanning the thin fibers before flicking them casually to the floor. "Well, that's not acceptable," he muttered. "I'll need to talk to Marco about this. Hair in a customer's dish? That's just, did you find the key?" Eleanor cut in, her voice calm but firm. Lucas looked up, his face unreadable for a split second. Key to the storage room, she said, tilting her head. For the oven. There was the faintest pause before he nodded. Right. Yes, I did. Don't worry about the soup, Eleanor said quickly. Maybe it's just the coffee messing with my palate. She reached for her coat. Actually, I was thinking we could look at that old oven together. I'm curious if it still works. Lucas's jaw tensed ever so slightly. It's boxed up, I think, he said, brushing crumbs from the table. Buried under other equipment. That room's a mess. Not worth getting your clothes dirty over. I don't mind a little dust, Eleanor pressed gently. He shook his head a bit more firmly. No, really, it's fine. Let me handle it. You just finish your breakfast. He forced a smile. Enjoy what's left of it. Then, with one last look, he turned and walked briskly toward the kitchen. Eleanor sat motionless for a beat, her eyes following his back through the swinging doors. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The unease she had carried for years sharpened into something more focused. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing over the still damp napkin. This wasn't just about soup anymore. Through the narrow rectangular window built into the swinging kitchen door, Eleanor watched Lucas move briskly across the tile floor, his towel slung over one shoulder, already speaking with Marco and gesturing toward the soup pot with a sharpness in his movements that wasn't typical. The staff around him moved more cautiously now, their instincts picking up on the tension. Marco, with a furrowed brow, lifted the heavy lid of the industrial pot and began stirring with a long-handled ladle, while Lucas leaned in close, speaking in a tone so low that even through the glass, Eleanor couldn't catch a single word. Only the posture, the urgency. She stayed frozen in place, her breath shallow, heart thudding, as she saw Lucas shift his attention toward the young waitress who had earlier served Eleanor the soup. His hands moved more quickly now, his voice raised though muffled, and the girl took a small step back, clearly startled. Her face paled as she began shaking her head repeatedly, gesturing with open palms and confusion, obviously distressed by the accusation she didn't understand. The unease in the kitchen was now palpable, and Eleanor's gut twisted with a fear that she hadn't let fully settle. Until now. Leaning back against the booth, Eleanor tried to still the tremor in her hands, the image of that tangled auburn clump resurfacing in her mind as strongly as if it were still floating in the broth before her. She reached into her coat pocket and pressed her fingers gently against the folded napkin, the texture still warm, still slightly damp. Her thoughts ricocheted, trying to make sense of Lucas's sudden aggression, and then memory hit. A dinner years ago, after her husband Richard had passed, when Lucas came over under the guise of support. Madeline had only been 17 at the time, and Richard had always distrusted Lucas, suspecting there was something buried beneath the charming smiles and helpful gestures. That night, when Richard made a passing comment about Lucas's failed marriage, nothing cruel, just offhand, Lucas exploded. He jumped across the table, screaming, grabbing Richard by the collar, and it had taken everything in Eleanor to pull him off. It was a moment they had all tried to forget, but now it rushed back with icy clarity. Back in the present, she saw that same tight rage in Lucas's body now, the narrowed eyes, the controlled breathing, the barely veiled threat behind his tension. It wasn't grief. It wasn't panic. It was control, pure, unchecked. She snapped her laptop shut, her fingers moving quickly to gather the rest of her documents. Each paper felt like a countdown, like a ticking clock she couldn't ignore. The scrape of her chair legs against the hardwood echoed too loud, but she didn't care. She had waited long enough. She couldn't risk another second. Eleanor slipped her coat on in one practiced motion, slinging her bag over her shoulder and turning toward the exit. As she passed the last row of tables, she caught a few curious glances from the kitchen staff, but offered no explanation. Just as she placed her hand on the door's metal bar, It swung open and Lucas stepped out, wiping his hands on his apron, that too-easy smile on his face. "You're leaving?" he asked, voice bright, too casual. "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to get home." Lucas tilted his head slightly, the charm on autopilot. "So soon? You barely touched your breakfast." Eleanor forced a smile, zipping up her bag. "I remembered I need to get ready for work." Lucas paused, frowning. "But Eleanor, it's Sunday. You don't work Sundays." Her stomach dropped, the mistake tightening like a vice, but she forced a small laugh. "Of course, right. I promised my friend Caroline I'd go to church with her this morning. She thinks it might help with closure." Lucas studied her, his face unreadable. "Church," he repeated. "That's new." "Trying new things," Eleanor replied, voice barely above a whisper. She stepped forward and, to her own surprise, leaned in for a quick hug, something she hadn't done in years. Lucas seemed caught off guard, but didn't resist. "I'll see you soon," she said, then stepped toward the exit. Just as she touched the handle, Lucas called after her, "Eleanor, wait." She paused, but didn't turn. "I'm sorry about the soup," he said. "Lucky it was just you who got it." Then, quieter, "Green soup and red hair. That's a bit unsettling, isn't it?" Eleanor turned slowly, fixing her expression into something neutral. "I didn't really notice the color," she lied. "Just something strange in the bowl. Probably nothing." Lucas narrowed his eyes slightly, as though searching for cracks in her calm. "Are you sure you need to go?" he asked, voice lower now. "Yes," she said firmly. "Absolutely. I'm already running late." And before he could say another word, she pushed through the door and stepped into the cold. The morning air hid her face like a wall of truth, sharp and clean, and she inhaled deeply, needing the sting. She walked quickly down the stone path, her heels clicking with each urgent step. She could feel his eyes on her, that same cold weight burning into the back of her coat. At the corner of the street, she turned slightly, glancing into a bakery window's reflection. There he was, still standing in the restaurant's doorway, watching her, unmoving. Once in the car, Eleanor shut the door with a firm click and let herself breathe. The silence inside the vehicle felt overwhelming, but safe. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. She started the engine, letting it idle, her eyes fixed on the rear-view mirror. As she pulled away from the curb, she watched Lucas disappear from view behind her. The streets of Ash Harbor were quiet, too quiet for a Sunday. The shops were closed, and the early fog had settled low over the harbor, turning the coastline into a soft blur. And yet, the silence in the town only made her thoughts louder. Could it really be true? Could Lucas, the man who'd lit candles at vigils, who'd held her hand during press conferences, who'd stood beside her for years, have been the one to take Madeline? And if so, where was she now? 10 minutes later, Eleanor reached the small brick building that housed the Ash Harbor Police Department. She parked carelessly, half over the line, and bolted through the front door, coat flaring behind her like a cape. "I need to speak with Detective Saunders," she said breathlessly to the officer at the desk. The young man looked up. "Detective Saunders isn't in yet, ma'am." "Can I help?" "It's about my daughter," Eleanor cut in. "Madeline Rhodes. I have new evidence." The officer's eyes widened slightly. Everyone in town knew Madeline's name. One moment. He stood and disappeared through a back hallway. Moments later, Officer Kennard Daniels emerged. His face aged, lined with years of unsolved cases and sleepless nights, but his eyes still held compassion. "Eleanor," he said, "you've got something?" She nodded and pulled the napkin from her coat. "I found this in my soup." Daniels took the napkin carefully, unwrapping it slowly to reveal the clump of damp, auburn hair. "It's Madeline's," she whispered. "I'm sure of it." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You found this in your soup?" "At the Mariner's Cross." In Lucas's restaurant. I think. I think he's been keeping her in the storage room. The locked one in the basement. Another officer approached. Daniels gave him a quiet order, and he left immediately. Then he turned back. Eleanor, are you absolutely sure this isn't your hair? What? She asked, startled. No, Daniels held up a hand. We have to ask. These are serious claims. Do you really think I'd do something like this? No, Daniels said. But protocol is protocol. You're accusing your brother-in-law of kidnapping and imprisonment. We need more. Eleanor's voice cracked as she nearly shouted. This is the more. The hair, the locked room, his behavior, it all points to something terrible. The front desk had gone quiet. Daniel sighed, then nodded once. Okay, we'll check the restaurant. Right now. But be prepared. If there's nothing there, it could make things very difficult going forward. I understand, she said. But if there's even a chance she's there, I have to know. Daniels turned to the younger officer. Get the car. We're going now. The police cruiser pulled up in front of the Mariner's Cross just before 10 a.m., its headlights still on in the thinning mist. Eleanor sat in the front passenger seat, her fingers knotted together in her lap, pressing against a clump of auburn hair hidden in her coat pocket. Officer Daniels stepped out first, followed by his partner, Officer Peterson, a younger man with alert eyes and a quiet confidence. The restaurant still had its closed sign in the window, its doors locked, waiting to open at 11. But the warmth of the kitchen lights inside told them someone was already there. A hostess appeared at the door moments after Daniels knocked, her smile fading the instant she saw the badges and uniforms. We're here to speak with Lucas Merritt, Daniels said calmly, showing his ID. He left about 20 minutes ago, the hostess replied, clearly unnerved. He didn't say where he was going. Eleanor stepped forward. He didn't tell me he had any plans. He said he was just going to grab a key from home. The hostess shook her head, glancing back over her shoulder. He didn't mention that to me. Is something wrong? We just need to check a few things, Daniel said. Is Marco in the kitchen? The hostess nodded and led them inside. Eleanor's heart pounded in rhythm with the creaking of the floor beneath her feet. She hadn't expected to find Lucas gone, especially not so soon after her departure. And yet something about it wasn't surprising. If he had something to hide, maybe he was already running. Marco emerged from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. He looked confused but wary. Officers, can I help you? Daniel stepped forward. We need to check the basement, specifically the storage room. Ms. Rhodes here believes it may be connected to her daughter's disappearance. Marco blinked. I don't understand. Eleanor, what are you talking about? You saw it this morning, she said, her voice thin. The storage room. You said Lucas had the key. Marco shifted uncomfortably. Actually, after you left, he unlocked the door and gave me the oven we were looking for. But it didn't work. Did you see him open a room? Peterson asked. Marco hesitated. No. I was in the kitchen. He just brought me the oven afterward. Did you see anyone else with him? Daniels pressed. A young woman with red hair? Marco shook his head firmly. No, nothing like that. The exchange had drawn the attention of other staff members, who now watched from the kitchen entrance and dining area. Whispers rippled through the group. Some looked worried, others skeptical. None stepped forward. Daniels turned back to Marco. We have reason to believe this may be an emergency situation. I need you to take us to the basement now. Marco hesitated another moment, then nodded slowly. All right, follow me. They passed the kitchen, past the racks of drying pans and simmering sauces, down the narrow stairwell into the basement. The lights flickered on with a metallic click, casting pale yellow light across the concrete floor. The smell of bleach and old would fill Eleanor's nostrils again, grounding her in memory. The storage room door now stood slightly ajar. "It's open," she whispered. Daniels pushed the door fully open and stepped inside, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. Peterson followed close behind. Eleanor and Marco lingered near the entrance. The room was cluttered with boxes, stacked high against the walls, holiday decorations, outdated menus, stacks of old wine glasses still wrapped in newsprint. Dust coated most of the surfaces, but a few spots looked recently disturbed. The officers spread out, moving boxes, tapping the walls, checking corners. "There's no sign anyone was living here," Peterson said after a few minutes. "No bedding, no food, no clothes." Eleanor stepped inside, her eyes scanning every inch. It looked just as Lucas had described, messy, disorganized, but not suspicious. "And yet, that can't be right," she murmured. "He had time. He knew I was suspicious. He could have moved her." She knelt beside a stack of boxes and began moving them one by one. Her hands trembled, but she kept searching. Behind the last row of crates, she found something strange. A set of deep scratches across the floor, jagged, as if something heavy had been dragged repeatedly over the same path. "Daniels," she called. "Look at this." He stepped over, squinting. "What made those?" "I don't know. But it's not random," Eleanor said. She followed the scratches to the wall, where the paint appeared discolored, darker than the rest. Peterson tested it with the butt of his flashlight. It didn't sound hollow, but the marks were clear. Something, or someone, had leaned there often. She took photos with her phone quickly, documenting every detail. As she continued searching, Eleanor found a small opening in the far corner of the room. She brushed away dust and debris to reveal a narrow compartment, a dumbwaiter. This wasn't here before," she said aloud. The officers gathered around as she pulled open the small metal door. The shaft connected directly to the kitchen above. "Could someone put something in this from down here?" Daniels asked. Eleanor nodded. "If someone was trapped here, they could have used it to pass something up." Daniels stepped back. "If that's true, she may have sent the hair up. That's how it got into the soup." Peterson looked skeptical. "It's a stretch." "Everything about this case is a stretch," Eleanor snapped. "But it fits." The group turned at a sudden shout from upstairs. Eleanor's heart leapt. "Eleanor," a voice called. She raced up the stairs with Daniels behind her. In the dining room, the restaurant had grown tense. Marco was standing beside a dishwasher, a young woman named Hannah, barely 21, small and quiet, holding a dish towel in her hands. She was signing rapidly, her gestures sharp with urgency. "She's mute," Marco said quickly, "but she's trying to tell us something. One of the waitresses is interpreting." The waitress stepped forward, pale-faced. "Hannah says she saw Lucas take a girl out of the basement early this morning. He rolled her out on something. She thinks it was hidden under the floor. She only saw it because she went down to check the water pump when pressure dropped. Lucas didn't see her." The room fell silent. "She says the girl had red hair," the waitress added. "Auburn." A collective gasp swept through the room. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. "Where did he go?" Daniels asked. She said he left through the front, then walked around the side. A few minutes later, she saw his car head toward the harbor, the waitress finished. Daniels turned to Peterson. "Radio dispatch. We need units at the harbor now." Eleanor was already moving, her hand on her phone, calling Detective Saunders as she sprinted toward the door. "I'm going to find her," she called out. "I'm not losing her again." The streets of Ash Harbor were nearly deserted as Eleanor raced toward the docks, her feet pounding the pavement with a desperation she hadn't felt since the first night Madeline disappeared. Her lungs burned, each breath sharp in the cold morning air. She clutched her phone tightly in one hand and the empty gun box Marco had brought up from the basement in the other. Her fingers trembled around its weight, not from the object itself, but from the implications of what it meant. She had spoken to Detective Saunders en route, gasping into the phone as she explained that Lucas had taken Madeline, that he might be armed, and that he was headed to the quiet end of the harbor. Saunders had urged her to stay put, to wait for backup, but Eleanor already knew that wasn't an option. She couldn't wait, not when her daughter's life might depend on every second. She reached the edge of the commercial district and slowed just enough to scan the area. The harbor stretched out ahead, the fog slowly lifting to reveal the sprawling coastline and the crumbling piers at the far end of town, where the tourist traffic never reached and the fishermen seldom lingered. She followed the road around to the left, passing boarded-up warehouses and shuttered bait shops. Then, tucked between two abandoned shipping depots, she saw it. Lucas's car. It was parked crookedly along the curb, the engine off, the driver's door closed. Eleanor ducked behind a stack of crates, heart hammering, eyes darting for any sign of movement. The dock just beyond the car jutted out into the water, narrow and worn, its boards bleached gray from salt and time. She crept closer, sticking to cover, scanning every shadow. Then she saw him. Lucas was walking back toward the car, alone. His pace was slow, almost casual, but his eyes were alert, scanning, checking, aware of his surroundings. At his waist, beneath his coat, a bulge hinted unmistakably at the outline of a holstered gun. Eleanor's pulse surged. She stepped into his path, the gun box clutched in her shaking hands. "Where's she?" she demanded, voice clear and steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Lucas froze, surprise flashing across his face before morphing into a confused frown. "Eleanor," he said, stepping closer. "What are you doing here?" "Don't," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Don't pretend. I know everything." Lucas tilted his head slightly. "Everything? What are you talking about?" "I know you took her," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "I know she was in that storage room. The soup. The hair. Michelle saw you. They all know." Lucas's expression faltered for just a moment, enough to confirm her words had landed. "Michelle," he repeated slowly. "The mute girl." His tone darkened, his voice quieter now, almost calculating. "You're not well, Eleanor. You've always been fragile. This obsession, it's gone too far." "Stop lying," she screamed, stepping forward. "Michelle saw you roll her out this morning. The police are on their way." Lucas's eyes flicked past her toward the distant road. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Eleanor took advantage of his hesitation. "Where is she, Lucas? What have you done?" He exhaled slowly, and then, just like that, the mask slipped. "It's too late," he said softly. "I gave her time. I gave her everything. But she never saw me. Not really." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Lucas's gaze hardened. "I protected her. I loved her. We could have had a life. But she wouldn't let me in. Wouldn't stop crying. Wouldn't be grateful. You locked her in a basement." Eleanor cried. "You drugged her. She's your niece." "She was supposed to be more than that," he snarled. "You don't understand. You never understood. James always got everything. And you? You never even looked at me." "I love James," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "He was your brother." Lucas's face twisted. "He always looked down on me. You all did." He stepped forward, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something truly terrifying in his eyes, something untethered. She stumbled back, clutching the gun box like a shield. "Don't make me use it," he said, his hand drifting toward his waist. "Don't make me do this." In the distance, the sound of approaching cars broke the moment. Doors slamming. Shouts. Eleanor turned and ran, bolting past him toward the dock. Her only thought, she might still be alive. I have to find her. Lucas shouted behind her, his voice full of fury. It's over, Eleanor. You should have let it go. But she didn't stop. At the edge of the dock, something glinted beneath the water, something dark and unfamiliar, just beneath the surface. Without hesitation, Eleanor kicked off her shoes and dove into the frigid harbor. The cold hit her like a wall, stealing the breath from her lungs, but she forced her eyes open. There, just a few feet below her, a shape, a person, Madeline. Her red hair floated around her face like seaweed, her arms bound, weights tied around her ankles. Her eyes were closed, skin pale, lips slightly parted. Eleanor swam with everything she had, the water clawing at her limbs. She reached Madeline, tugged at the ropes, her fingers slipping. The knots were too tight. Panic set in. Her lungs screamed. Her vision darkened. But then movement. Another splash. A figure beside her. A uniformed officer. Strong hands pushed hers aside. A knife sliced through the restraints. The officer grabbed Madeline, kicked upward, pulling both of them toward the surface. Eleanor followed, her chest aching, vision blurring. She broke the surface with a gasp, choking on seawater and air. Arms reached down from the dock, pulling her out as the officer handed Madeline up. CPR began immediately. Come on, Eleanor whispered, crawling to her daughter's side, her hand closing around Madeline's limp fingers. Breathe, baby. Please breathe. An officer pressed down on Madeline's chest, counting steadily. Eleanor sobbed, refusing to look away. And then Madeline convulsed. Water spewed from her mouth. She gasped. She was alive. She's breathing, someone shouted. Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd, restaurant staff, police, bystanders. Paramedics pushed through, wrapping Madeline in blankets, checking vitals. Eleanor was led back, but refused to let go of her daughter's hand. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lucas being dragged in handcuffs toward a cruiser. His face was red with rage, spittle at the corners of his mouth. She was mine, he screamed. She always belonged to me. Enough, an officer said, shoving him into the back seat. You have the right to remain silent. Eleanor didn't watch him go. She only watched Madeline. Her daughter was alive, and she wasn't going to let her go again. The antiseptic scent of Ash Harbor Medical Center filled Eleanor's nostrils as she sat beside her daughter's hospital bed, her clothes still damp from the harbor, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea she had no intention of drinking. Madeline lay beneath a white sheet, bundled in thermal blankets. An oxygen cannula nestled gently in her nose. Tubes ran from her arms to fluid bags, and the steady beep of the heart monitor was the most beautiful sound Eleanor had ever heard. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently around them, their voices low but purposeful. One nurse recorded vitals, another checked the 4-line, while a third gently applied ointment to the bruises circling Madeline's wrists. Eleanor barely noticed them. Her eyes remained fixed on her daughter's face, watching each precious breath, each twitch of movement. They had been rushed to the emergency room immediately after the rescue. The paramedics had treated Eleanor for mild hypothermia, wrapping her in silver foil blankets and checking her vitals. But her injuries were minor. She had refused to be separated from Madeline, and once both had stabilized, they had been moved into the same room under observation. Detective Saunders stood at the foot of the bed, his notebook in hand. He had arrived minutes after Madeline began breathing again, his team having secured Lucas and cleared the dock. A female officer stood discreetly by the door, her presence a quiet assurance that no further harm would reach them. Dr. Patel, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind round wire-framed glasses, entered the room with a tablet in one hand. He nodded to Saunders before turning to Eleanor. Ms. Rhodes, he began gently, I have the preliminary results of your daughter's examination. Eleanor sat straighter, reaching for Madeline's hand and gripping it tightly. Tell me everything. Dr. Patel nodded and glanced at his screen. Madeline is suffering from moderate malnutrition and dehydration. Her BMI is significantly below healthy parameters. We've started her on intravenous fluids and nutrients, and her body is responding. He swiped the tablet, bringing up images. We also found extensive bruising on her ankles, consistent with prolonged restraint. Some of the markings show distinct ligature patterns, first wooden, then metallic. The progression suggests different devices were used over time. He turned the tablet so Eleanor could see. Her stomach lurched. The photo showed Madeline's ankles, mottled with bruises in varying shades, some purple and swollen, others yellow and healing. Deep lines etched into her skin like ropes. These here, Dr. Patel said, pointing, are consistent with a wooden stock or spreader bar. The newer marks are from shackles, possibly leather or metal. He moved to Madeline's head, gently tilting her face toward the light. We also found scarring and minor tearing around the corners of her mouth, likely from frequent gagging. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, her throat tightening. She took a shaky breath and asked the question she'd been dreading since the moment her daughter was found. Did he? Dr. Patel's expression softened. There's no evidence of sexual assault. However, blood tests revealed prolonged exposure to sedatives and tranquilizers. She's been kept in a heavily drugged state for extended periods. Eleanor's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Will she recover? Physically, yes. With rest and nutrition, her body should heal. Psychologically, recovery will be longer. We've requested a psychiatric consult once she's stable. As if on cue, Madeline stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first, then blinking slowly as she adjusted to the light. Her gaze drifted around the room until it found Eleanor. "Mom," she whispered, voice cracked and barely audible. Eleanor's breath caught. She leaned closer, brushing a strand of damp hair from Madeline's forehead. "I'm here, sweetheart. I found you. You're safe now." Madeline's eyes flicked to the strangers in the room, Saunders, the uniformed officer, and panic briefly crossed her face. "It's okay," Eleanor soothed quickly. "They're here to help. They need to ask a few questions." "About what happened?" Detective Saunders stepped forward and pulled up a chair. "Hello, Madeline. I'm Detective Saunders. I've been on your case since the beginning. We don't have to talk right now, but if you're ready." Madeline nodded slowly. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "I want to tell you. I want him locked away forever." Saunders opened his notebook. "Take your time. Start wherever you're comfortable." Madeline closed her eyes for a moment, then began. "He kept me in the storage room. At first, it was just the wooden thing, the stock, around my ankles. I couldn't move more than a few steps. He brought me food, water. Sometimes he talked to me. Most of the time, he just watched." Her tone was flat, detached, like someone describing a dream. "Last week, he changed the restraints. Said the wood was leaving marks. Didn't want me to get an infection. He switched to shackles. I think that's when I started a plan." Eleanor spoke quietly. "I saw the scratches on the floor, the wall. You were leaning there a lot, weren't you?" Madeline nodded. "Hours every day. I counted the sounds. The creaks from the stairs. The clicks of the dumbwaiter. Then this morning, I heard your voice upstairs. I knew I had one chance." Her eyes welled with tears. "I had a screwdriver. I'd been hiding it. I picked the lock on the shackle and crawled into the dumbwaiter. Pulled the rope. Michelle saw me. I pointed at a bowl of soup. I cut my hair. Dropped it in." Eleanor gasped softly. "She told us." She didn't tell him. She told us everything. Relief flooded Madeline's face. I got back in the shackles before he came. But he noticed. Got mad. Said we were leaving. He drugged me. I don't remember the rest. You were in the harbor, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Weighted down. But we found you. We pulled you out. I thought you stopped looking, Madeline whispered. Never, Eleanor said fiercely. Not for 1 second. Saunders closed his notebook slowly. Madeline, your statement is vital. It confirms everything. Lucas Merritt is in custody and facing multiple charges: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, attempted murder. With what you've told us, he won't see the outside of a prison again. Madeline closed her eyes. Good. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse stepped in. There are a few people here to see you, your mom and Madeline. They're from the restaurant. Eleanor looked to her daughter. Madeline nodded. It's okay. Michelle entered first, followed by Marco and 2 waitresses. They carried flowers and a teddy bear. Michelle signed quickly, her hands shaking. A waitress interpreted. She says she knew something was wrong. When she saw you in the dumbwaiter, she wanted to help. She was scared, but she's sorry. Madeline reached out and squeezed Michelle's hand. You saved my life. As the staff filed out quietly, promising to return soon, Eleanor sat beside Madeline, gently brushing her daughter's hair. I never stopped, she whispered again. I never stopped. And Madeline, eyes heavy, whispered back, I know. Madeline lay back against the hospital pillows, her skin pale, but her grip on Eleanor's hand firm. The earlier tears had dried, and in their place was a quiet resolve, a strength Eleanor hadn't seen in her daughter since the day of her high school graduation. That day had been all light and promise. This one, though born of suffering, held a different kind of power, a survivor's power. Detective Saunders remained seated, though his pen no longer moved across his notebook. He watched Madeline with the stillness of a man absorbing the weight of every word. The uniformed officer near the door remained quiet as well, his presence solid and respectful, as though his role had shifted from protection to witness. Madeline, Saunders said gently, can you tell us more about what happened during the time you were kept at the restaurant? Madeline's throat worked as she swallowed. Her voice remained hoarse, but steady. At first, he told me Mom had left, that she couldn't afford to take care of me anymore. He said there were too many bills, that I was better off with him. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, the lie burning in her chest. I didn't believe him, Madeline continued. Not really, but I was scared. And then, a couple of months in, he started watching the news on his phone. He didn't realize the volume was up. I heard them say my name, say I was still missing, that Mom was still looking for me. Madeline looked at her mother then, her voice cracking. That's when I knew you never gave up. I never did, Eleanor whispered. I never would. Madeline nodded and continued. He kept me sedated most of the time. Not every day, but enough. I'd wake up and not know how long I'd been asleep. Days would blend together. I think he liked it that way. He said he was giving me peace. Eleanor's jaw clenched. He talked to me like we were a couple, Madeline said, her voice going flat. He'd say things like we'll go away together, or just wait until we get our new life. I never answered him. I refused. But that only made him angrier. Detective Saunders spoke softly. Did he ever harm you physically? Madeline shook her head slowly. He was careful. Not bruises where people could see. Just control. The restraints. The injections. The isolation. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. Toward the end, he got desperate, Madeline said. The restaurant wasn't making enough money. He kept saying we were close, that he just needed a little more time. He was watching you, Mom. He said you were getting too close, that you might ruin everything. I was, Eleanor said quietly. I was finally listening to my instincts. Madeline turned her head slowly to meet her gaze. Thank you for that. There was a soft knock at the door. A nurse peeked inside. Ms. Rhodes? Detective? I'm sorry to interrupt, but the forensics team just arrived. They've completed their initial search of the storage room and Lucas Merritt's home. Detective Saunders stood. Thank you. I'll come speak with them shortly. The nurse disappeared. Saunders turned back to Madeline. Your statement has been extremely helpful. Once you're ready, we'll take a full formal deposition, but for now, rest. You've been through enough. Madeline nodded and laid her head back on the pillow. As Saunders turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. Detective, what will happen to Lucas? Saunders paused, his hand on the doorframe. He's being charged with multiple felonies: kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted murder, drugging a minor. With Madeline's testimony and the physical evidence, we'll push for life without parole. Good, Madeline said softly. After the detective left, the room fell into a gentle quiet. The beep of the heart monitor provided a metronome of calm. Madeline stared at the ceiling. Mom. Yes, sweetheart. Do you remember that birthday at the restaurant? My 19th. I remember every second. I wore that dress you bought me, the blue one with the little stars. You looked beautiful, Eleanor said, her voice thick. I was so happy that night. I thought everything was going to be okay. College, friends, my future. Eleanor reached out and brushed her daughter's hair back from her forehead. It still can be. I hope so, Madeline whispered. A few hours passed. Later that afternoon, the door opened again, and Michelle entered, her face hopeful, hands already moving in rapid sign language. A waitress accompanied her again, translating. She says she's sorry she didn't do more. She saw things over time. Strange things. But she was scared. She didn't know how to say it. She thought she might be imagining things. Madeline gestured weakly for Michelle to come closer. Michelle took her hand. You saved me, Madeline said clearly. You did more than anyone else could. Thank you. Tears filled Michelle's eyes. She signed again. She says she wishes she could have found you sooner, that you didn't deserve what happened. Eleanor nodded. None of us saw the signs, but you were brave when it mattered. Marco entered next, awkward and solemn. He carried a bouquet and set it down on the windowsill. We've shut down the restaurant, he said. None of us can walk through those doors again. It doesn't feel right. Not after what we missed. Eleanor looked at him, surprised. We're cooperating with the police, he added quickly. And I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know. But I should have. We all should have. There's nothing more to say, Eleanor replied, not unkindly. You helped when it mattered. Marco nodded, his expression stricken. He lingered for a moment, then turned and left quietly, leaving the room in a reverent hush. Eleanor pulled the blanket higher around Madeline's shoulders and leaned back in the chair. Her body ached, but she refused to close her eyes. Madeline's voice broke the silence. Do you think I'll ever feel normal again? I don't know, Eleanor answered truthfully. But we'll try. Every day. Madeline looked at her, her eyes raw and open. I'm scared. I know, baby. But you're safe now. You're not alone. Madeline nodded, and for the first time, her eyes began to close without fear. Her hand remained in her mother's as sleep slowly claimed her. Eleanor held on tightly, unwilling to let go, not even for a second. She stared out the window at the harbor in the distance. The fog had lifted. The sun was shining. And for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe. The next morning, Eleanor returned to the Mariner's Cross, this time not as a grieving mother desperate for answers, but as a woman driven by unfinished instinct. The restaurant stood quiet, its doors locked and windows dark. The "closed indefinitely" sign hung at a tilt, already collecting dust along the frame. Police tape fluttered gently at the entrance, a stark contrast to the place that had once hosted laughter, candles, and Madeline's last birthday celebration. Detective Saunders had given Eleanor permission to re-enter, accompanied by one of the officers on his team. They weren't expecting to find much, after all. The room had already been searched, but Eleanor had a gnawing in her gut that wouldn't go away. The young officer, Peterson, greeted her at the door. "You're sure about this?" he asked, unlocking the front with a gloved hand. "I need to see it myself," Eleanor replied. The interior smelled different now. No garlic, no citrus, just dust, old wood, and that faint tang of mildew. Without the buzz of activity, the polished floors and elegant lighting looked hollow. The booth stood empty, abandoned mid-shift. A stack of menus lay askew on the hostess stand. They descended into the basement, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The same low hum of the overhead bulbs flickered to life, casting weak pools of light across the cluttered floor. The storage room door had been resecured, but Peterson used a master key to let them in. Eleanor entered slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room with fresh eyes. She knelt down near the area where she'd first seen the drag marks, still there, though partially obscured by new footprints from investigators. Her fingers grazed the concrete, and she followed the lines again, this time more deliberately. "There's something here," she said aloud. Peterson moved closer, watching her trace a pattern with her fingertips. Eleanor turned toward the far left corner. Something caught her eye, a cabinet she hadn't noticed before, half hidden by old boxes and collapsed signage. It was metal, painted a dull gray, with thin rust lines creeping down from the corners like veins. One drawer was slightly ajar. Eleanor reached for it and pulled it open. Inside was black foam, molded into the shape of a firearm. But the gun was missing. Her breath caught. "This is where he kept it," she murmured. "The one he used when he took her to the harbor." Peterson stepped forward quickly. "Please don't touch it further. We'll have forensics collect it." He slipped on gloves and carefully lifted the drawer out to photograph its contents. Eleanor stood, her eyes scanning the space again. "I know it's not enough to prove everything, but it shows premeditation. He had that gun ready. He knew what he was doing." Peterson nodded, voice firm. "It strengthens the case. And every detail helps." She moved back toward the dumbwaiter, opening its small door again. This time she examined the shaft more carefully. The rope pulley was frayed, the metal rusted with age. Inside the lift, a scratch marked the wall, thin and sharp like from a blade. "She really climbed into this," Eleanor said, wonder and sorrow lacing her voice. "She used it to try to be seen. That's how she reached Michelle." Peterson crouched beside her. "It was brilliant. Risky but brilliant. She shouldn't have had to be that brave," Eleanor said bitterly. She took more photos with her phone of the cabinet, the dumbwaiter, the scratches on the floor, and then stood in the center of the room once more. She let the silence wrap around her, imagined Madeline chained to the wall, time bleeding into itself, day after endless day. Eleanor's hands trembled, not from cold this time, but from fury. Then something else caught her eye, above the cabinet near the ceiling. A small vent, dusty but not sealed. She stepped on a milk crate and peered inside. Wadded cloth, crumpled paper. She reached in gently, pulled out one of the papers, and unfolded it. A torn corner from a takeout menu. On it, scribbled faintly in pencil, were 3 words, "Still here." Help. Her breath hitched. She opened another scrap. Is anyone listening? And a third, Mom, I miss you. Tears spilled freely now. These are hers, she said, voice cracking. She wrote these in here. Hid them. Maybe hoping someone would find them. Peterson gently took the notes, placing them into an evidence bag. She never gave up, Eleanor whispered. Even when it made no sense. Even when no one could hear her. No, Peterson said softly. She didn't. They ascended from the basement together, the morning sun just beginning to stream through the dusty blinds. Back upstairs, Eleanor paused at the table where she had sat only days before, unknowingly inches from the truth. She looked down at the empty soup bowl, still sitting where forensics had left it, crusted now with dried broth and faded green stains. She placed her hand on the table's edge and closed her eyes. This place stole 3 years of her life, she murmured. It won't steal another second. Peterson locked the doors behind them as they stepped into the sunlight. Outside, the harbor glistened. The fog had finally burned away completely, revealing the waves rolling steadily under a clean blue sky. Will you come by the station later? Peterson asked. Saunders wants to go over everything we found. Eleanor nodded. Of course. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he never walks free again. Peterson hesitated, then added, Madeline's notes, they'll mean something to the jury. And the dumbwaiter connection? That's powerful. You brought us this far. She brought us, Eleanor corrected. I just listened. She turned to walk back to her car, each step lighter than the one before. As she drove away from the restaurant, she didn't look back. She had seen enough behind that door. Her focus now was on the road ahead, on Madeline's recovery, on justice, and on rebuilding the life that had once been taken from them piece by piece. Today, they were finally putting one of those pieces back in place. 3 weeks later, Eleanor sat on the cold wooden bench of the Ash Arbor County Courthouse, her palms pressed against the folded coat in her lap, the same one that had once held the napkin-wrapped hair that started it all. The courtroom smelled of paper, ink, and polished oak, a place meant for clarity and consequence. Yet Eleanor's chest swirled with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Madeline sat beside her, wearing a simple cardigan and soft slacks provided by the hospital's outpatient care team. Her hair, once tangled and dull from years in captivity, had been washed and trimmed. Though still thin and pale, she carried herself with poise that belied the trauma behind her quiet strength. The courtroom murmured around them, reporters whispering to each other in the back row, legal assistants flipping through case files, police officers standing at attention by the doors. Marco and Michelle sat 2 rows behind Eleanor, both offering silent support. Even now, the town of Ash Arbor was still reeling. Lucas Merritt, beloved local chef and community figure, accused of kidnapping and holding his own niece hostage in the basement of his restaurant, had shattered every illusion of safety they once held. At the defense table, Lucas sat in a county-issued suit, shackled at the wrists. His hair was longer, less groomed, and his once charming face had grown gaunt in the fluorescent lights of the detention center. But his eyes, cold and calculating, still held that flicker of intensity Eleanor had come to dread. Judge Holloway entered the courtroom, her robe swishing as she took her seat. This court is now in session, the bailiff announced. The people of the state of Maine versus Lucas Arthur Merritt. The charges were read aloud: kidnapping in the first degree, false imprisonment, attempted murder, drugging a minor, unlawful restraint. Each word echoed across the room like a drumbeat, deliberate and heavy. Eleanor gripped Madeline's hand, both of them silent but unshakable. Lucas's attorney stood. Your Honor, we'd like to enter a plea of guilty to all charges. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Saunders had told her they were prepared for a drawn-out trial, Months of proceedings, cross-examinations, delays. But this? The judge blinked. Mr. Merritt, is this your decision? Do you understand the consequences of pleading guilty? Lucas stood slowly, his voice disturbingly calm. Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Judge Holloway nodded. Very well. I'll accept the plea. A sentencing hearing will follow. Madeline whispered, Why would he do that? Eleanor squeezed her hand. I don't know. Maybe he knows there's no escape. As court adjourned temporarily, Lucas turned suddenly toward them, locking eyes with Eleanor. You never saw me, he said softly, almost mournfully. You never understood what I could have given her. Saunders stepped in between them before Eleanor could respond, guiding them out of the courtroom with firm purpose. They met again later that week for the formal sentencing hearing. The courtroom was even more packed than before. News outlets had caught wind of a story. Renowned chef confesses to kidnapping niece, holding her in basement for 3 years, and now there were cameras just outside the courthouse steps, satellite vans parked along the curb. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with expectation. Lucas was brought in, still shackled, still eerily composed. His attorney declined to make a final statement. The prosecution, led by Saunders and the district attorney, laid out the evidence in painful detail. The restraints, the drug tests, the notes Madeline wrote and hid in the vent. Michelle's eyewitness account, the soup, the hair, the recovery at the harbor, each point stacked upon the last, like bricks sealing a tomb. Finally, Judge Holloway turned to Madeline. Would you like to make a victim statement? Madeline rose, her legs trembling slightly, but she walked to the front of the courtroom with quiet bravery. She stood before the judge, her voice shaking only slightly. For 3 years I was locked in the dark, she began. I was told lies. I was drugged. I was kept from the world and from the people who loved me. But I never gave up hope. I never stopped believing my mother would find me. She turned then, facing Lucas. And she did. She found me. Despite everything you tried to do. Despite every lock, every chain, every lie. You stole 3 years from me. But you didn't take everything. You didn't take who I am. And you'll never take another second. Lucas's face remained neutral, though his hands twitched slightly at his sides. Madeline returned to her seat, and Judge Holloway leaned forward. Lucas Merritt, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no reaction from Lucas, just a faint nod. As he was led out of the courtroom, he passed Eleanor and Madeline. For a moment he paused, and in a whisper only they could hear, he said, She was supposed to be mine. Saunders stepped in again, cutting off any further words as Lucas was escorted out the back in cuffs. The silence that followed was deep and heavy. Outside, sunlight bathed the courthouse steps. Reporters called out questions, cameras clicked, microphones were extended. But Eleanor and Madeline walked straight through the chaos, neither of them speaking, neither of them looking back. They got into the car waiting for them, and Eleanor exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. You were incredible, she said softly. Madeline didn't respond right away. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon. I meant every word, she finally said, and I'm never letting anyone trap me again. 2 months after the sentencing, Eleanor sat at the small kitchen table in her modest Ash Harbor home, the morning sun spilling across the checkered tile and dancing along the rim of her coffee mug. Across from her, Madeline flipped slowly through a scrapbook Eleanor had pieced together, a collection of school photos, birthday party shots, and little mementos Eleanor had preserved during her daughter's absence. Outside, the harbor was calm, the fog that had so often haunted their lives now replaced by a clarity they had once thought unreachable. Though their days were now peppered with therapy appointments and long, quiet conversations, a sense of fragile normalcy had begun to return. Madeline still startled at sudden noises. She struggled with sleep, sometimes waking from dreams too vivid to explain. But she was healing. Every day, Eleanor watched her regain small pieces of herself, a laugh that didn't flinch at its own sound, a decision made confidently, a step taken toward the door without fear. Dr. Patel had kept in touch, referring them to a trauma counselor who specialized in long-term captivity cases. The process was slow, but Madeline was resilient. She had begun writing again, journals mostly, sometimes poetry, and Eleanor often found her by the window, scribbling furiously into her notebook as the light filtered over her shoulder. One afternoon, while organizing the back closet, Eleanor came across the folded napkin she had once pressed into her coat pocket at the Mariner's Cross. She hesitated before opening it, staring down at the strands of auburn hair now dry and brittle. That clump of hair had been the whisper that started everything, the silent scream that broke through 3 years of stillness. She placed it in a small wooden box, sealing it not with tape, but with reverence, and stored it at the back of her wardrobe, not to forget, but to remember what instincts, love, and persistence could achieve. Madeline, too, kept a token from her ordeal, the 3 scraps of paper she had hidden in the vent above the storage room. One read, "Still here. Help." Another said, "Is anyone listening?" And the third, written the day before her mother found her, simply read, "Mom, I miss you." She had laminated them herself and tucked them into the back of her journal. For her, they weren't just remnants of pain. They were reminders of her own voice, her refusal to be forgotten. One weekend, Detective Saunders visited them. He brought with him a small envelope and a cautious smile. Inside were copies of the official court records and a letter confirming Lucas Merritt's transfer to a maximum security correctional facility in the northern part of the state. He won't be near Ash Harbor again, Saunders assured them. And with the evidence and his plea, there's no possibility of early release. Not in this lifetime. Madeline thanked him, her voice steady. "It's not about where he is," she said. "It's about where I am now." Saunders looked at her with genuine admiration. "And where you're going," he added. The visit ended with tea and a quiet reflection on how deeply a town could be shaken, how even the familiar could hide monsters behind smiles. Eleanor had once believed that justice would be enough, that seeing Lucas behind bars would bring closure. But in truth, it wasn't justice that healed her. It was the moments that followed, the quiet mornings, the returned glances, the growing strength in her daughter's walk. One spring evening, they walked together down to the harbor, the very spot where Lucas had tried to end Madeline's life. The dock had been repaired since, the warp boards replaced with smooth new planks, but Eleanor could still see the memory of that moment beneath the surface. As they reached the end, Madeline paused and looked out over the water. The wind picked up strands of her hair, now longer, now vibrant, and swept them gently across her face. "I thought I'd never see this again," she whispered. Eleanor stood beside her, saying nothing, her hand gently resting on her daughter's shoulder. "But you did," she said after a moment. "You came back." Madeline nodded slowly. "Because you never stopped looking." They stayed there until the sky turned gold and the first stars blinked into view. That night, Madeline slept soundly, her dreams quiet, her breathing steady. Eleanor watched from the doorway for a long time, the silhouette of her daughter curled beneath a quilt, a book resting open on her chest. The house was still, peaceful, real. In the weeks that followed, Madeline enrolled in online classes, slowly easing back into the idea of a future. Eleanor returned to her freelance work, often writing essays and columns about resilience, motherhood, and the unseen strength women carry in their quietest moments. Their story, though shared across news channels and courtrooms, had now become something else entirely, personal, intimate, theirs. No longer a headline, no longer a cautionary tale. It was a truth they owned, shaped not by what was done to them, but by how they rose beyond it. The hair in the soup had started the unraveling of a tightly woven secret. But it was love, a mother's love, fierce and unrelenting, that had brought Madeline home. And now, in the quiet days that followed, both women stitched together a new life, not free from scars, but made stronger by them. The past had not disappeared, nor had the pain. But so too had returned the sun, the breath of the sea, and the sound of laughter echoing through the kitchen of a home once filled only with silence. And in that warmth they began again, together, always,